real reason for the Vietnam War: power, profits, and the politics of fear. Introduction. The Vietnam War, 1955 to 1975, is often framed in history books as a noble, if tragic, attempt by the United States to halt the spread of communism in Southeast Asia. But the deeper truth, rarely taught in schools, is far more complex, political, and profit-driven. Beneath the patriotic slogans and Cold War rhetoric lay a tangled web of economic interests, colonial legacies, and ideological manipulation that shaped one of the deadliest conflicts of the 20th century. This article uncovers the real motivations behind America's involvement in Vietnam, ones that had less to do with freedom and more to do with control, capitalism, and containment. Chapter 1. The Myth of Communism Containment. The U.S. claimed its involvement was to stop the domino effect, the idea that if Vietnam fell to communism, the rest of Asia would follow. While this was a real fear during the Cold War, it became a convenient public justification. In truth, U.S. leaders were more concerned with maintaining geopolitical dominance in Asia, protecting capitalist markets in Southeast Asia, preserving influence over post-colonial nations, preventing Soviet and Chinese ideological influence from taking root in resource-rich regions. Chapter 2. A legacy of colonial control. Before U.S. involvement, Vietnam had already fought a long war for independence from French colonial rule. France, with U.S. support, attempted to maintain control over Vietnam after World War II. But in 1954, the French were defeated at Dien Bien Phu, and Vietnam was split into North, communist under Ho Chi Minh, and South, U.S.-backed dictatorship. The U.S. stepped in not to liberate Vietnam, but to replace the French colonial grip with American oversight. In short, the war wasn't about preventing domination. It was about preserving Western dominance in a new form. Chapter 3. Economic Interests and the Military-Industrial Complex. One of the most overlooked drivers of the Vietnam War was the economic profit generated by ongoing warfare. President Dwight D. Eisenhower famously warned of the military-industrial complex, the collusion between defense contractors, arms manufacturers, and government policy. During Vietnam, companies like General Electric, Dow Chemical, Boeing, and Lockheed Martin saw enormous profits from weapons production. Napalms, bombs, planes, and chemical agents were mass-produced for the war effort. The longer the war dragged on, the more money flowed through defense budgets and private contracts. This wasn't a war just against communism. It was a war that made people rich. Chapter 4. Propaganda and Psychological Warfare at Home. The U.S. government needed to justify the war to its people. To do this, it employed media control to suppress anti-war stories, patriotic messaging to sell the war as a battle for freedom, demonization of the enemy, portraying Ho Chi Minh and North Vietnamese as threats to American liberty. However, by the late 1960s, whistleblowers, journalists, and veterans began to expose the truth. The Pentagon Papers, leaked in 1971, revealed that the U.S. government knew the war was unwinnable early on, yet continued to escalate involvement. Chapter 5. Civilian Casualties and War Crimes. The Vietnam War resulted in over 3 million Vietnamese deaths, 58,000 plus American deaths. Widespread use of Agent Orange, which caused birth defects and ecological destruction. Massacres like My Lai, where U.S. soldiers killed hundreds of unarmed civilians. These tragedies were not accidental. They were byproducts of a war machine driven by strategy, politics, and profit rather than moral necessity. Chapter 6. The Real Motive: Control, Not Compassion. The Vietnam War wasn't truly about helping the Vietnamese people. It was about preventing a successful communist revolution that could inspire other post-colonial nations. If Vietnam were allowed to unify under Ho Chi Minh, it would represent a win for the global left, a challenge to capitalism's dominance in the developing world. Chapter 7. Aftermath and Lessons Ignored. Despite withdrawing in 1975 and watching Saigon fall, the U.S. continued similar foreign policy patterns, intervening in Latin America, supporting dictators who favored U.S. markets, undermining democracies that leaned socialist or nationalist. Vietnam was not an isolated mistake.